Welcome to the Ardent Wife podcast. Thank you so much for joining. I'm so glad that you tuned in today. We have an extra special podcast episode that we are sharing with you today. We are talking about sexual dysfunction. We're talking about porn. We're talking about shame. We're talking about all those things that don't get discussed in the church. And who's we? It is my sisters Jennifer, Tiffany, and an extra special guest, Dr. Joy Skarka. Dr. Joy is from Authentic Intimacy. She is a program manager there. She's on the front lines, serving authentic intimacy members and community. She oversees the online book studies there. She creates content, and she speaks at ministry events. And she also joined the Authentic Intimacy team in 2020. And since then, she has built a transformational ministry for women who struggle with sexual shame and pornography. Dr. Joy is passionate about creating spaces to free women from sexual shame and lead online small groups for women with this unwanted sexual behavior. She also coaches and teaches Christian leaders how to help women find freedom from sexual shame and pornography. And Dr. Joy is also an adjunct professor at Dallas Theological Seminary, teaching the course Sexuality and Ethics. She's published a chapter in Sanctified Sexuality, Valuing Sex and Oversexed World, an ebook on Kindle, and Freedom from Porn for Women, which is a 6-day devotional and Bible reading plan. She also has a book coming out with another doctor, Dr. Julie, and it is Her Freedom Journey, a guide out of porn and shame to authentic intimacy. And probably her most important role is that she is married to her husband, Zach, and they live in Florida with their 2 beautiful children. Welcome, Dr. Joy.
Thank you, Dee, and thanks for having me. What an introduction. I'm glad to be here.
Isn't it funny when people read your bio and you're like, oh man, I'm pretty awesome.
I know. I'm like, maybe I should shorten it.
Not at all. We need to know all of who you are. I definitely think it's all important. And it's such amazing work that you're doing in discipling women and helping them come out of sexual shame. Can you share with us just a little bit maybe that I didn't add to the bio that you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, sure. And I think just good to know, like, this passion of mine came out of my own story. So I'm here as a woman who's been through it. I've been through sexual assault, and that resulted, this is a very brief summary, but in a porn addiction. And I couldn't find resources that, especially for women, talking about this. I found a few here or there, but when I was struggling in college, I couldn't find that many people talking about, to start sharing my story as I was finding freedom and healing and help other women, because I didn't want other women to feel as alone that as I felt, and just the shame of a woman struggling with sexual sin. There's so much shame for especially Christian women when it's not historically talked about for them. And so that's what gave me this passion and desire to do this work.
And I have to say, that just listening to you share that, that transparency and that authenticity and being open about that. And it's just amazing. I'm just reminded of how God redeems and how, our mess becomes our message. Like and it's just like when you're in it, you're kind of like, I hate this. Why is this happening? But the Lord uses it all. And then he could take that and then use it to set so many other people free and to give you a story. But I don't want to dismiss the bravery, that it takes for one to admit that, especially in a Christian community, to say, hey, I am a Christian and I'm struggling with this thing, so that's amazing. Amazing.
Yeah. And for part of my story, it took another woman to go first and say that she had struggled with these things. For me, I had never even heard a Christian woman say these words out loud.
Wow.
So when she did that, she really created this safe space for me to say, oh, me too, I'm struggling. So if she would have done that, I probably would have kept this sin to my secret to myself, which would have been creating more shame in my life.
Yeah.
So very thankful for that.
Yeah. And I'm reminded of the women who are going to listen and say, me too, who are going to join in and raise their hands too. So I'm just so excited about it to have this conversation.
Yeah. And I think we sometimes, I mean, sin is sin, right? Before God, sin is sin. But sometimes there is so much shame around sexual sin, and around, whether it's even could be, like you said, something that's happened to us, right? An assault, an attack, a rape. And there's things that come out of that. And so,
Mhm.
I'm grateful that you're willing to unpack this with us today. So I just want to also you to hear my voice saying thank you. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit, like intro, what is authentic intimacy? Could you describe that for people that are listening?
Yes, so we're talking about our ministry or the actual authentic intimacy that we have?
I'd love for you to share both because I really, for me personally, because I serve under Dr. Joy, it's been very pivotal in my life and for the women that I have done online book studies for. So if you could share both aspects of it.
Yeah, I love this, and it's kind of how so Dr. Julie Slattery, she co-founded this ministry, and kind of her love and passion came out of the definition as well, so I'll share all of it, but we serve couples, singles, people walking through all different stages and different struggles, and even just wanting to know, what does God's word say about sexuality? What is his design, and how do we reclaim that in our world today? So that's kind of how her passion started, and we do that through a podcast, Java with Julie, and then we have books, resources, and my personal favorite is our online book studies, which we are blessed to have Dee serving with us. She leads some of our married women groups, and so that's where community and transformation is really happening, because you're meeting with the same women online, sharing your story, and that's where you're experiencing authentic intimacy, which I'll unpack for you. And that's really being fully known and fully loved. So it's being free to be who God created you to be, without fear, without judgment, without hiding, without lies. You're really true to who God created you to be. You're living in a vulnerability, in connection, you're sharing. And the bottom line is, that's how God created us. He created us with this desire to be fully known and fully loved with a relationship with Him. And so while we're on this earth, we're just experiencing kind of like a little glimpse of that in friendships, in small groups, in discipleship relationships, in our marriage, especially as a metaphor. But we'll never truly get to experience that. We're in that not now, not yet kind of thing on earth, but one day in heaven, we will fully be known and fully be loved by God. So it's exciting.
Yeah. And that's what really drew me to the ministry, just to check it out, because you guys point it back to God and his design for sexual relationships and just relationships in general, and knowing like the biblical principles and Dr. Julie's heart too. She's like always pointing you to Jesus in any situation. And it redefined sexuality for me as a woman, as a wife, and just even the women that are in my online book studies. I've just seen so much transformation happen in it's typically 11 to 13 weeks that we meet together. It is such a blessing to come alongside these women. And so I'm so grateful for that ministry.
Mm-hmm. And just hearing you talk about reclaiming, right? Because we learn so much about sex from so many different places. But when I want to learn about sex, I mean, the Bible is not the first word that comes to my mind. When I want to go back, it's like, no, I need to go read this magazine, maybe Playboy, but not Bible, right? Different beat. But, just to say, that, reclaiming God's design, because a lot of us, including myself, you don't come to know that until you've made the mistakes or you've been out there a while. You're like, well, I've done all these things, but what does God say? This person, my best friend told me this. I learned this in my high school health class. When I went to the health department, I got put on birth control and they told me this, and it's just everybody has a different motive, and then to go back to the original design and say, okay, God, what did you create this to be? So I love that, just reclaiming like what God meant when he designed us and sex. So that's amazing. And that has me wanting to join one of the clubs. But It's not about me. I'm going to ask you another question. In your time working with women, what is one of the biggest barriers that you've seen these women overcome? And, what advice would you give someone who's struggling with authentic intimacy?
Yeah, so and part of what Dee shared of my bio is I got my doctorate at Dallas Theological Seminary, and I did research on this question to figure out specifically looking at Christian women and pornography. And what it was for them, the biggest thing was shame. And so I found out that it was actually shame, sexual shame, that kept women in a cycle of addiction. And so in that shame is actually what caused them to hide and to not pursue intimacy in a friendship or a relationship, or to not share their struggles openly. And even if you look back at the garden, like the first sin, right? The first example in the garden, what happens after they realize they're exposed? They hide from one another. They hide from each other. They realize they're naked. They hide from one another and they hide from God. And so that was the first example of shame. And so when we are walking through whatever struggle, sexual struggle, or struggle in general, brokenness that we're dealing with, our first reaction is to hide it. We don't want anyone to know. And why is that? Because we're afraid they won't love us if they know. We're afraid we won't experience that authentic intimacy. And sadly, that's actually the reality for some women when they first share their story or their struggle. Maybe they're met with judgment or like a shocked face, like, oh my. Like that's actually part of when I first told someone about my sexual assault that happened. It was like, well, why were you there? Like, what were you wearing? Like, those were some of the questions I got. And so when that happens, you don't want to pursue an authentic, intimate relationship with that person. You want to hide it, never talk about it again. And so, yeah, that really is preventing our women from opening up more and more to their spouses and to friends.
And I think that is, to have that awareness, when you said that, cultivating this awareness of our responses. So even if this, maybe it's not, for listeners who are listening, it may not be something that you yourself struggle with, but someone may be seeking to have an authentic, intimate relationship with you and share that. And your response and how you receive that is important. So I think in saying that, it's a reminder to us as believers, right, to in our response and responding with compassion and love and not judgment. Yeah, so they feel that intimate, they feel safe. You've become a safe place for them.
Yeah, not only in your relationships with other women, but also in your relationship with your husband or your future husband. Do you have any, in your opinion, what can a woman just starting off in marriage do to help build an authentic, intimate relationship in their marriage?
Yeah, so I'll tell you this funny story. So my husband and I, we actually met at seminary at Dallas Theological Seminary in an elevator. On our first day, like going to orientation, we lived in the same apartment building. We met in this elevator. And we quickly were just talking about what we do and stuff. And then like a week later, he had realized I was a blogger. I had my own blog at the time. That's sort of how I jump started into this ministry. He had read over 100 blog posts before our first date.
Oh, wow.
Like every blog I had. And it was my story, and I always wondered like how I was going to share my story, with my future husband. And he came to me and he's like, "Oh, I found all these edits. Like you have all these errors, like some typos." Like he made a list.
Sir, no, keep going.
That's what he came with yet. Grammar.
Yeah, that's what he said. He was like, "Here's all the typos, and I'm like, "Okay, where are we going with this?" So anyway, fun fact about how we met, because people always ask, like there's this fear of
Yes.
meeting a guy, if you have a past, how you're going to talk about it, what you're going to say. And I'm like, well, I had this really weird, unique situation where my husband to be had read my whole story. But what was cool for us is, once that was all out there, we could really just continue diving deeper. There was no fears. There was nothing I was holding back. And so for us, we did like jump months ahead forward when we were engaged, but we did a lot of premarital counseling and we joined like a marriage. It was like a newly married small group right away and read a ton of books together and just processed them. Um, but I just encourage couples, like there's so much fear. Well, two things I'll say here. There's fear that if you have a story that no man's ever going to love you.
Yeah.
And I like to tell them like
Yeah.
if this man loves Jesus, he's going to look at you as
Yeah.
Jesus looks at you.
Mm.
And what is that? That's pure, made new, set apart, redeemed, like these beautiful words. That's how this man will look at you. And my husband was a great example of that, where he had no judgment towards my story. Now, maybe they'll be shocked initially, and that's okay. Or maybe they're processing it and they need time. Like if that happens, that's okay. Don't view that as a red flag to that this man could still be a godly man, but just an encouragement there. And then secondly, like when people ask, like, when do we share? Do we share it all at once? Because I tell my story, and I'm like, that doesn't mean you should share everything right up from the gate. But finding that time and space to share slowly. It could be slowly over time. It could be a conversation at a coffee shop. Figuring out what works best for you. For us, it just gave me peace that like he knew everything
Yeah.
and loved me. That authentic intimacy. I didn't have any fears or reservations about that, so it was helpful for me.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing that he would read your whole story. His concern was grammar. Like it's like like okay, he's a keeper. Like everything I done wrote here and it's great. Okay, great.
Yeah, I remember when I have, a pretty promiscuous past and definitely had a lot of struggles. And I remember when we were engaged, that was when it was like, okay, I need to tell him this. And it was really hard. And we went to a park and he knew I had to tell him something about my past. And so he was like, we're walking and then like, I'm trying to tell him. And then we sit down and he's like, well, would it be better like if we sit back to back? And then we sat back to back and then I would start the sentence and he would help me fill it in because it was so hard to just say it. But I felt like I couldn't go into a marriage. I needed him to be able to make that choice, right? Like I needed to trust.
Yeah.
It felt like a step of trust to be like, I have to be really honest. I want you to know. I mean, we didn't go like dive deep into everything in that moment, but he needed to know some really big things like, hey, this is my past. These are some things that happened. I think it's important that you know. And he was so gracious because it was so hard for me to say it. And he just helped me get it out. And he was so loving and so kind. But it was definitely hard. Like I still that memory of where we were sitting, like it's very prominent, in
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah,
then we
thanks
were
for saying that.
able to and get married and wait until we were married, which would have never happened. Like to be able to have like I feel like God gave me that ability for him and I to wait, which was just beautiful. Like the way he treated me in that moment and then how he was so gracious that we just waited until we were married to have a redeeming thing for me, especially since my past was so full of, sexual promiscuity as well as, assaults. And so.
Yeah. And how do you like I know in sharing that, like how do you determine how much to share and when to share it? It's like, do I do it while we're engaged? Do I do it after we get married? Or, does it change? Like,
Yeah, well, one thing, even just working with women who, are either in their freedom journey, somewhere in their freedom journey, maybe they're like just starting dating. I feel like some things are important to know while dating and not waiting till engaged, just because you might be more triggered in certain situations, or you might be uncomfortable, or you might need to avoid certain things. And so just to know that. Now, I don't think I tell them they don't have to know every single detail. They don't need to know who it was or what happened, those sorts of things. I say you don't want them to picture anything. That's kind of a helpful way to just define it. You don't want to set a mind picture, but some things might help them to know as you're figuring out and navigating boundaries in dating.
This is such a healthy conversation to have for women, even if you've been married and there's some things that you haven't shared. And I feel like the theme for everything is love is greater than fear. Like the fear, I'm just thinking, even in the garden, like the love that God had for us overcame that. And so when you are walking down this path, either you've been married or you're walking towards marriage, you have to remember that. Like ultimately, the foundation is love, which is always going to be greater than fear. And so, and it's scary. It's hard. We've talked about it on this podcast so many times. Having hard conversations are really uncomfortable. But once you get through those things, that's where you find growth and connection and intimacy with each other. So thank you for answering my question.
Yeah, and one thing too, like you mentioned, if it's maybe you're already married, it could be helpful to talk through these conversations with a counselor, like having a third person there just to help you process it. Um, I know Zach and I, my husband, we went to a counselor a few times just to talk about some of those hard things and to process it together. And it's just so helpful. They're trained in this, they know what they're doing instead of you guys trying to navigate it on your own.
Yeah.
And do you know of a resource where women could seek a counselor and for conversations like this? That does Authentic Intimacy have like a list, or is there a place where you could
Yeah,
send
so
them?
we don't do counseling, but we recommend there's an Institute of Sexual Wholeness that they have a list of Christian sex therapists. If you haven't heard of a sex therapist, you don't have to be married and having sex to go to one, but they're just really helpful in talking about all things sexuality. Highly recommend that. So it's called the Institute of Sexual Wholeness.
So what advice would you give to a woman who's struggling to overcome that sexual shame of her past?
Yeah, so listening to this conversation, that's a great first step in your journey, especially if you've never started talking about these conversations. Listening to us have this conversation is such a great jumping point. And so in my research, so I surveyed over 1,000 Christian women to figure out how are they experiencing shame? How are they finding freedom? And the three big things I found are these. So the first one is better understanding God's love and character. Because if we don't know who God is and we don't spend time with him, then of course we're going to think he doesn't love us in our sin and in our shame. The second way is in a community. So finding an authentic community where you can have these conversations like we're modeling today, share your story, and you're met with love, and people ask questions, and there's empathy, and that healing happens there. I love this phrase, and I'll probably get it wrong, but pain happens from people. And so healing has to happen with people. I think someone says it a little better than that, but it's like our wounds come from other people. So that's how we have to find our healing. And then lastly, to overcome our shame, I found in my research was people didn't really understand God's design for sexuality. Think about the messages, the narratives that people grew up hearing in their churches. If they grew up in purity culture, there was a lot of shame around that. So even just having sexual desire or sexual questions and curiosities, creating a lot of shame around that because nobody knew that it was okay to ask these questions. Nobody knew God's design. And so much freedom happens when people are able to understand God's design. And that's what I love, why I love what we do at Authentic Intimacy is we are training people, equipping them to have these conversations, to learn and to dive deeper into the scripture and all of this, in a God honoring way to just help people find freedom. So those are kind of a summary of the three ways I've found.
Yeah, and I definitely want to plug the online book studies because Passion Pursuit, just that and Rethinking Sexuality, those two books, Dr. Julie wrote, she co-wrote with Linda Dillow, and the other one she wrote, and Rethinking Sexuality blew my mind. Like and I think like I could see God's love for us even more from reading that book. Like why he's jealous for us, why he desires us. And it's that same because I can relate to that in my marriage. And so that, like I said, helped me with my sexuality as a woman and then as a wife as well. And learning that because the church doesn't really talk about sex, but the world does openly all the time. And it's a lot of misconceptions, a lot of deception, right? But the church doesn't offer that to us believers. And so I love how you guys are always, like you said, God honoring, pointing it to the Lord and sharing what God designed was for it. So that's like a shameless plug for Authentic Intimacy, because I would love to guide you through an online book study with it. But yeah, Rethinking Sexuality is a really great book, and Passion Pursuit for married women is a fantastic book if you're looking for something to tangibly hold and point you in that direction.
And Dr. Joy, as you were talking, I was thinking you talked about God's design, learning God's design. And was there anything in your journey, in your personal story, in your study that just blew your mind, or this one truth that set you free? Was it something you discovered that's like, oh my gosh, like I didn't know this, that you can share
Yeah.
with us?
Yeah, so and kind of going back to what Dee said is like if the church isn't talking about these things, the culture will. And that was true of my story. So to answer your question, Tiffany, what happened to me, I had this sexual assault and I had all these questions. Was that sex? I didn't have a sex education growing up. My parents actually sent me to a weekend sex camp at a church in middle school. And this is wild. My only memory of this camp was the last day we all sat around in circles and the parents joined us and they were like, okay, repeat after me. We're going to get comfortable saying words. They were like, penis, everybody say it. And you were supposed to like repeat it. And so my poor dad, he stands up and he says, I can't do this. And he leaves. And yeah, and friends, that was the last time we ever talked about sex in my house, in my family. So for me, I just had all these questions and curiosities. I first saw porn as a fifth grader, but it wouldn't be until here I am in college. I just had this sexual assault. I had all these questions. And so I turned to the internet for my answers, and that's what led me to pornography. And this, friends, is the story for so many women. They don't have a safe place to ask their questions. So they turn to Google, and porn is a bad sex educator. It's fake, it's edited, it's abusive, it's addictive. And so for me, that's where I learned about sex. So there was so much shame attached to it. I had questions and thoughts like, did God mess up when he created me because I was a woman with sexual desire? And I only ever heard in churches and Christian situations, the men got the porn talk, the women got the modesty talk. And I kept thinking I should be in the men's talk, in college ministry and all these different situations. And so I go to seminary, and I was in my freedom journey. I was healing from my trauma. I was recovering from my addiction, but I still had so much shame because I was a sexual being and I didn't know that that was how God designed me. I didn't know that we were all created as sexual beings. I thought something was wrong and broken with me because nobody was talking about it. And I was sitting in this seminary class. It was called a sexual wholeness class, which I tell every seminary student to take. And that's what I'm now co-teaching, which is such a full circle moment.
Oh, wow.
And I'm hearing this Christian sex therapist teach the class, teach me God's design, that we're actually, this is a good thing to have sexual desire. I had no idea.
Like, I'm free.
It was a bad thing.
Yeah.
Like, what? And that was just, an incredible turning point for me, just to break free of some of that shame. And then to realize, you just have to learn how to steward it. You're stewarding it in singleness and you're stewarding it in marriage. And nobody talks about that either. They say, marriage is going to fix all of your problems. And that's not true. So really processing through that in my own story and helping so many women process through it in theirs as well.
Wow, that's just powerful. That's just so powerful and so freeing at the same time, because you talked about the difference, like females get the modesty talk, males get this other talk. And it's just like, and so you think you're a unicorn. You're like, well, I'm in neither of those camps. So who am I? And just, and then to hear it and to study it and then be in a place where you're like, well, no, God designed me this way. He didn't make a mistake when he designed me. So now how do I steward this? Because I think, like you said, too, in marriage, I think sometimes for the person who may have a higher sex drive, it's almost like you get married and you think, oh, this is going to fix me. I'm no longer going to struggle with pornography or masturbation because now I have a wife. And now you put your spouse in this place of, like, oh, I have to supply his needs because otherwise, if I don't, then someone else will, and so it's like still, you're married now, you're no longer single, but you're still stewarding how God created you and honoring him with that. It doesn't just, your problems don't dissolve because you say I do.
Yeah. And vice versa
that's
too.
good.
There's some women, in some relationships, the woman has a higher sex drive than the husband, and also realizing like that's okay too, and God has space for that too, and you're okay for being like that as well. And just having these conversations, being very open about it, and learning and growing, I think helps for intimacy, stronger relationships, and for you not to feel isolated and alone.
So what if someone is feeling isolated and alone, and let's say they hear this podcast, right? Married, single, I don't know if that really matters per se, right? But what would you say to them? What would you say would be a good first step? Aside, I think I'm hearing, right? Tell someone, be open, right? And then would that be the first thing? The second thing, what would you say?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. And it's definitely, like you said, bringing your story into the light is the first step because the enemy thrives in the darkness. And so when we are bringing things into the light, he's not happy about it, but you're experiencing some freedom, which is so incredible. And then finding that authentic community, whether it's at your church, maybe a small group at your church, or the women at your gym, you find out, hey, she's a Christian, let's work out together and talk. Wherever it is, I mean, as long as you're finding somebody who you can share with, do life with, someone who loves Jesus, is following Jesus, that's the best place to start.
Yeah, we're supposed to spur each other on, and we're supposed to hold each other to a standard of righteousness as believers. And so, such good advice.
Yeah, but I get the fear piece too. I hear that a lot because so many people have been burned because they haven't actually experienced authentic intimacy in community. And so I just want to encourage you, like, that's real. If that happened to you, like, that pain is real. God sees that pain. But I want to encourage you, like, it's worth it to try again and to put yourself out there because there are good people out there who, and then also too, knowing that your identity in Christ doesn't change if you have that experience again. If somebody reacts negatively to you, like, God still sees you and loves you. And so, yeah, just to encourage you.
Ooh, that right there, that alone, like your identity in Christ doesn't change. He still loves you. Like that right there is so powerful. I do want to ask you about your book that's coming out and her freedom journey, because you were saying I was on my freedom journey. What is a freedom journey? Can you share
I
that?
know. I now use this phrasing all the time because of the book title.
And I want to learn
But
more.
what's funny, Dee, is so we actually originally called the book, and here's a little insider scoop. We called the book Freedom Girl was the original title. So, you know, this was my story, and I started blogging about it, and people started asking me to share it on podcasts and speaking events and all these different things. And someone said to me, they said, "Do you really want to be known as porn girl?" And it really hit me like, gosh, no, I don't want to be known as porn girl. And it became this identity thing of like, oh no, like maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Like, I don't want to be this. And here my sweet husband gets more points. He said to me, I told him the story, I was really struggling, and he said, "You're not porn girl, you're freedom girl." I was like, "Oh, so sweet." So that became my new identity. Like, no, I'm freedom girl. And so that's kind of how I view myself, is I'm helping other people be free. And so Some people will use the term recovery journey. You're in recovery, that kind of thing. And I just liked the focus to be on the freedom piece. I'm like, yes, we are on recovery, we're healing, we're being redeemed, that kind of thing. But what is our goal? Our goal is that freedom piece. Let's focus on that. And so that's what I tell people is let's focus on, because so many times women, and this is probably true of many struggles, but you start counting the days. You're so focused on, I haven't watched porn in 10 days, or it's been 5 days. You're so focused on the behavior instead of being free in Christ. And I think it's so important. Instead, let's focus on Jesus and the healing and freedom that gives us instead of our behavior. And when we do that, I think it'll actually change our behavior. When we grow in our identity, when we grow in our love and understanding of Him, we're going to want to obey Him. We're going to want to live a different life. And let's focus on that freedom instead. So it's a cool story. So now the book is called Her Freedom Journey.
Absolutely. You're so right. And I've been in this space too. Like when bad things happen, I feel like we're quick to say the enemy is attacking. I'm like, no, God's refining us. He's sanctifying. Let's not give him any shout out. Let's not give him any airtime. Let's just fix our eyes on the things above and not the things of this world. So I love that perspective. And so the book's coming out this summer. It's a guide out of porn and shame to authentic intimacy. Is it like that book, What to Expect When You're Expecting, when you're reading? Or can you share
I haven't read that one.
Oh, you haven't? Maybe because I'm old and we did not have Instagram and TikTok to share all those things. So we had this horrible book. It was What to Expect When You're Expecting. It was 20 years ago because my oldest is 20. Jen's nodding her head because she knows. And it was all these things. And you read this book and you're like, I'm scared at the end because it's all the most horrible things that could happen if you're expecting and what to expect. Yeah, it was not a great guide. That's probably why you don't know about it and you have your little ones, because it didn't help anybody. So how is your book going to help women who are trying to get out of porn?
Oh, that's so funny. Just the comparison of the two. I never would have put them together. That's funny. But yeah, so if you might have heard of Julie Slattery's book, Sex and the Single Girl. It is a workbook format where you kind of do it as a daily devotional where there's space for journaling and discussion questions. That book was so life-changing to me on my journey. This is set up just like that. So it's kind of like a next step deeper dive into sexual struggles. We talk about any unwanted sexual behavior. It doesn't have to be porn, even though we talk about porn because that's my story. But somebody's addicted to masturbation, lust, hookups, sexting, all these different things. It would be helpful to them. And so what I love, I'm a journaler. I think that's a great way to process. And so that's why the book has space for that. So there's discussion questions throughout it and journal prompt questions, so that you can kind of process and take it all in. Because this book isn't designed to be read over a weekend. It's a really deep dive to help you on. It's a journey. That's why we like the word journey too. Your freedom journey doesn't happen overnight. Yeah. It is a process that it's going to take time for you to unpack those root issues, which we talk a lot about. We dive deep in figuring out, well, what is triggering you and causing you to turn to porn? That's what we need healing from. That's what we got to work on. So.
Thank you for explaining that, because that's so helpful. And just the idea of walking through it, working through it, it being an ongoing read that you have, that helps you with sexual immorality, whatever that might be, not just porn too. Because I think that's also helpful for some. They might be like, I don't do porn, so that's not my thing. But there might be something else that you can walk through this book and get freedom through your journey. So thank you.
Yes.
Is there something we're missing that you feel is really important for people to know as they hear this? What are we missing?
Yeah, Jennifer, I think the biggest thing is just so many people don't realize how big of an issue we're talking about in the Christian sphere with women. I talk to so many people and they just say, oh yeah, people watch porn. Well, men watch porn. Do women watch porn? there's this like question of really, and then I say, Christian women in your churches, they're even, reading erotica. That's really common. There's so many books out there that are just marketed as an average romance book, but really it's porn in written form. And people don't talk about that or include that. So I would just say, like, if this is something you didn't know was an issue, or you just never heard it addressed for women, Christian women, like there's so many resources to educate yourself on what it's doing to the brain. Um, and also, if you're a parent, like I'm a parent, let's talk to the parents. Age 7 is the average age of first exposure to pornography, age 7. So if you haven't talked to your kid about porn before they're 7, and there's resources and ways to help you do it, you're behind. And I'm just going to be that frank because I did. There's a survey research that came out of, I think it was 3,000 women, Christian women, who at one point in their life was addicted to porn, and the majority found porn between 7 and 11 years old. And so if like, I'm becoming more passionate about helping the parents, especially now that I'm a parent, like we can do so much preventative work to help these women not be addicted as they get older, and our boys too, by having these conversations with them. So yeah, I would just throw out there to the parents.
And saying that, Joy, like at 7, like what's the entry point? Is it the internet? Is it friends? Is it sleepovers? Like what is it?
Yes, all
All
of
of
the
the
above.
above.
Oh my
It really
gracious.
is.
Okay,
No,
so I'm
no.
gonna put Reese in a bubble.
That's the
It's
thing.
like,
You can't. And I have my 3 daughters, and it's definitely there's a lot of things that these kids are becoming introduced to through cartoons, like same-sex marriages, transgender, that they don't understand. And so what are they going to do? Because it's super simple. They have their tablets. They're going to Google it. And then they are exposed to something that they're not ready to process developmentally, mentally. And it's also not a belief system that we want to set for them too. So having like basic conversation, and we'll put in the show notes some books, because I know of these books that it has like from 0 to 4, so like this, from 5 to 9, talk about this. It's a really great book series. I can't remember on the top of my head. I know Dr. Joy knows what it is because we recommend it, but it's really good to start having these conversations. And they're very, I don't want to say innocent, because it's just it gives our children, they're smart. Kids are smart. And what's developmentally they're ready for, they can totally grasp. And it gives you those words and that conversation topics and the, just to go through it with them. And I know Mama Bear Apologetics, she has a series of different books, but that's a fantastic book to just talk about all this. And they're encountering their friends who say, I think I'm a boy, I think I'm a girl, like, so that they can even be intimate with their friends, right? Authentic, intimate, starting at a young age and having this, because they're learning truth. And when you start these conversations when they're young, when they get older, they have no problem coming to you with this. That takes away the shame. That takes away, that takes away the shame, and they'll have this conversation. And it's usually at 9:30 at night when you have like one eyelid open and you can't really.
I know.
They'll come in, and like my she'll come in with all the tea, and I will perk up and try my best to get it all in, because like she feels safe. She feels like she can have these conversations with me, because we started that at a very young age and we continued that until now. So it's really good to start now. It's not going to be comfortable at first. It's weird. It's awkward. Yes. But you want them to be your safe space for them to explore and learn and grow. So I know you're like,
Reese.
what?
I know. Reese and I be having all these conversations, and Chris is like, because I homeschool her, Joy, and Chris, my husband, he's like, what do y'all be doing at school? Because the other day we was telling her, and I named stuff. I know your poor dad gets up and leave, but I name stuff like, this is the vagina, this is a penis, this is not a purse, that all these cookie and no, this is what this is. Right. No. And so I was telling her the other day, she asked me, she want to know where babies come from and how babies are made. And I was telling her that they can come from your stomach, sometimes women have like a C-section. I told her mommy had a C-section. And I said, or they can come out of your vagina. And she was like, out of your vagina? I said, yes. And I said, which would you prefer, from your vagina or your stomach? She said, none of it. I said, good. Let's keep it that way. I was like, good answer. But, just, trying to, give her the names of stuff, just creating now, even now, that safe space. Like, you have questions, come to me. I'll tell you.
Yeah.
You don't have to go to your friends but yeah, it's funny how, she's like, none of it. But let me tell you that she woke up the next morning. She was like, Mommy, I figured it out. I said, what did you figure out? She said, the vagina has a zipper. And she's, y'all, this is so off topic. But she was like, you unzip it to get the baby out. And once the baby out, you zip it back up. I was like, now, I didn't tell you nothing about a zipper. Okay. So she has her little imagination too. I was like, okay. But
So yes.
yeah.
So part of my story is sexual dysfunction as well, and that's what led me to authentic intimacy. So my girls have been introduced to a vulva puppet, and there's actual puppet, and they know, and I know that from my past, and so, but yeah. It's the vulva puppet's it's not scary looking, and it's a good way to show them their parts, because I really feel like there's some grown women who still don't know all that's down there. So
right, that's
really,
true.
It's really good to inform. I'm a girl mom. I don't know about boys, but I think it's a great way.
I know I probably freak out with boys too. Like, oh, go to your daddy.
I would not even know where to start.
Okay.
So, Dr. Joy, can you share with us where we share that you're with Authentic Intimacy? Where will they be able to find the book? Where can they find you? Any places that you want to share?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I would love, if you are a woman struggling with any of what we talked about, and if you feel alone, please reach out. I would love to just connect you with the resources that you need to help you wherever you are on your journey. So you can send me a message on Instagram at Joy Skarka. That's a great place. You can email me, joy@authenticintimacy.com, whatever works best for you. But we have so many resources, and part of my job is just helping people find them and connect them to you. So please reach out. And then the book, anywhere, Amazon, Her Freedom Journey, comes out this July. Just can't wait to get that into the hands of all the women that need it.
I'm so excited for that. So grateful for you coming on today. And yes, we have conversations like this on the podcast all the time. We also have conversations in the Ardent Wives clubs, not necessarily details, but we respect each people's privacy, but we can always point you to a place and a space where you can safely navigate these topics. And you can find that in the show notes. And altogether, what we hear at the Ardent Wife, we just want to cry, laugh, and grow closer to Jesus, whatever that may be in your marriage. And so we're just grateful that you caught on to this episode today, and just thank you. So be blessed until next time.